This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Again in the air, down the left field line, Alou reaching into the stands and couldn't get it, and he's lit it with a bang. We've seen this happen here
before. Welcome into episode 5 of Distant Replay, the podcast where we go back and revisit the greatest games ever played. And tonight, you heard it. I mean, you hear that highlight and you know exactly which game we're talking about. It is the 2003 NLCS Game 6, Florida Marlins, Chicago Cubs, better known as the Bartman game. I am Ben George. Welcome in Mike Noto alongside. Mike, going back to this one, this was only 16 years ago, but it's one of the games that you always think about when the Major League Baseball playoffs start back up.
Yeah, this game had all the hallmarks of a great Major League Baseball playoff game, and unfortunately it had the biggest hallmark of all, which was someone to blame. Seems like these big Major League Baseball playoff games always have a GOAT. And no pun intended there, but this game definitely had one.
Yeah, no question. We're going to talk quite a bit about Bartman, how this game played out. If you haven't heard our podcast before, we go back, we rewatch the game as it aired originally. Tonight we watch it on Fox, the local Fox affiliate, which we'll get into, but provided a little different perspective. But we go back and we talk about kind of what was leading into this game, why it was important, why we picked it, kind of set the stage for the game. Then we run through the game, talk about what we witnessed, what we observed, some of the big moments, big plays. And then we have some post-game kind of recap, what ifs, some social media, what would this game have been like with social media around, a lot of different stuff we'll talk about. So there's plenty tonight to get into. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Please do, by the way, so you get every episode delivered to you. But check us out on Twitter, @Distant Podcast. A lot of conversation there, and we'd love to have you be a part of that, and send us the games that you want to hear. You can email us at distantpodcast@gmail.com, and also our website is distantreplaypodcast.com. So let's dive into this game. As I mentioned, 2003 NLCS Game 6. This took place on October 14th, 2003 at Wrigley Field and aired on Fox. And Mike, I mean, we don't really have to explain why you picked this one, but it was the Cubs on the verge of their first World Series appearance in 58 years, but also Bartman.
Bartman and the curse. I mean, you had this during this time period of baseball, you had the Cubs trying to exercise their curse and the Red Sox trying to exercise their curse. The Red Sox at this time were playing in the American League Championship Series as well. So, I mean, that's the first thing you think about when you think about this game is Bartman. Second thing, trying to exercise those curses.
So what did you know about this game before we went back? I mean, a lot of times we kind of know bits and pieces, but what do you remember? What's in your memory when you think back to this game before you watched it again?
Some of the things that stood out to me besides the Bartman play, which obviously sticks out to everyone, was Mark Pryor's performance. I remember his performance up until that 8th inning being great. And I also remembered the shortstop's error, Gonzalez's error. Those two things are the first two things I thought of when we decided to do this game. And then as I started to watch it, the gaps started to fill in and I started to remember a lot more.
Yeah, for me, it was obviously Bartman, thinking about that green turtleneck, the blue hat, the headphones, all that. But also, like you, remember Pryor, remember being there, thinking about, with Cubs fans thinking, okay, this is going to happen. And I can specifically remember just the energy in the ballpark, the countdown, from the announcers in this game, kind of counting down the outs, and then all of a sudden just came to a screeching halt there in the 8th. And I can't wait to go back and talk about everything we saw because we remembered most of it. But, yeah, I think filling in the gaps on kind of how that game played out up until that 8th inning is kind of something I was looking forward to going back into this one. Where were you when this game happened originally?
When this game happened originally in 2003, I was at that point commuting to and from college. So I was at a buddy's house just watching this game, another baseball fan. And, you get caught up in these two series. It seemed like I was watching baseball for 6 months every night until midnight, when in actuality it was probably only 3 or 4 weeks. But, yeah, just watching it with one of my buddies who's a big baseball fan.
For me, I was in school still at Alabama and had a lot of Cubs fans around me. And you might not realize this, but there's a lot of Cubs fans in Alabama. A lot of Cubs fans in the South because growing up, completely different than what it is today, you had, 3 or 4 big superstations, as they used to call them. millennials probably have no idea what a superstation is, but WGN was one, TBS was the other, the two biggest ones. So we got Braves games and we got Cubs games, and some occasional White Sox games, but mainly those two. So there were so many people in Alabama that grew up coming home from school, 3 o'clock, an afternoon game. Cubs are always playing day games, it seemed like, so you could turn it on and almost always catch a Cubs game. So many people that I knew growing up were fans of the Cubs. So I was watching this game with a few Cubs fans in college. They were so fired up at what they thought they were about to witness. They were saying, forget the GOAT curse, forget all that stuff. We have the best pitcher in baseball, arguably right now, on the mound for us. What could go wrong? So I remember specifically watching with those guys, and tell you what, by the time this game was over, it was pretty rough being around them because it was a rip your heart out moment in this game. So let's talk about why this game is important, kind of what was leading up to this game that kind of set the stage for what we were able to witness that night at Wrigley Field. So first things first, the Cubs World Series drought. 58 years between the last time they had been in into this game. So long since they had even been in the World Series. They weren't even in the playoffs a whole lot, so this was kind of a rare appearance for them. But the other big story was Mark Pryor, and you kind of touched on it. He was the guy going into this game that the Cubs wanted to have on the mound.
Yeah, up 3-2, heading home, with Pryor to go in Game 6, and if necessary, another young superstar in Kerry Wood going in Game 7. You couldn't write up a better script as far as if you're a Cubs fan and how you wanted to see, this series unfold. And Mark Pryor was the headliner. This was his first full year in the major leagues. He went to college, he went to USC, and he burst onto the scene in 2003, pitching over 200 innings. We'll get into this a little bit more later, but he actually averaged the most pitches per outing of any pitcher in Major League Baseball that year. So when I say burst onto the scene, there was probably not many players. If I asked you in 2003 who you'd want to start your team with, if I asked you who you wanted to start a franchise with, there's not many players you would have mentioned above Mark Pryor.
Yeah, so Mark Pryor came into this game. He was a rookie in 2002, was 7th in Rookie of the Year voting. 2003 was an All-Star, 3rd in the Cy Young voting. He was 9th in MVP voting, finished 18-6, had a 2.43 ERA, 245 strikeouts, over 200 innings. I mean, the numbers in his stuff were electric. And they had Kerry Wood, as you mentioned, and also Carlos Zambrano on the staff. So they had a really good young nucleus on this staff. And the Cubs, look, the one thing that surprised me going back and looking at this was I was looking at the playoff records, and kind of when I think about this game, I think about the Cubs getting a World Series appearance kind of ripped away from them. I think back to this as being based on what I remember in that time and who I was talking to and who I was hanging out with, Cubs fans. This was a team that was kind of a team of destiny, it seemed like, and everybody kind of thought that this team had the World Series championship in their sights, was on the way to that. But I went back and looked at the playoff records. They had the worst record in the NL out of all the playoff teams, which is shocking to me.
Yeah, you lose sight of that sometimes in the Major League Baseball playoffs because the teams with the best records don't necessarily, always win. I hadn't realized, to be honest, until you just said it, and looking it up here really quick, that they did have the fewest amount of wins in the National League side of things. And again, it just goes to show how much those two pitchers sort of overshadowed everything else going on. And even if you look at the Marlins roster top to bottom, their everyday lineup, I thought as I was watching this game, wow, this lineup is even better than the Cubs lineup top to bottom. The Cubs getting home field here, obviously, because they won the division and the Marlins were the wild card.
So how we got to this point, Game 6, Florida won Game 1 at Wrigley in 11 innings. Cubs came back, won 12-3, and then took the first two games in Miami at Pro Player Stadium before the Marlins, behind Josh Beckett, got back to within a game. But it was 3-2 heading back to Chicago, which set the stage for what everybody anticipated to be the big moment. I mean, so we got to watch this game on the local Fox affiliate, and the fans in the ballpark and around the ballpark were electric. I mean, there's no really other way to describe it. I mean, you look at the fans in this game, we've seen some great atmospheres, right, over the last 15 years, and we still see a lot of big games. But that moment, the anticipation those fans had, that was one of the best crowds I think I've ever seen for a sporting event at Wrigley.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is that pregame feed was literally the entire pregame show was about how they were going to control the crowd when the Cubs won.
Yeah.
It was just like 3 different stories all based around the same topic. Okay, what are we going to do if the Cubs win? There was the police commissioner was on there saying, the anchors were giving you advice on where to go around the stadium if you were there. And you could just see in the stadium, directly outside the stadium, everyone was just really juiced up.
Oh, and they were just assuming this was in the bag. I mean, just by watching that, and we go back and we watch, we check to see what feeds are available on YouTube to watch the entire game. We were lucky for this one, and we'll put it on our website at distantreplaypodcast.com, that we were able to get the local Fox affiliate because we got the actual taste of what it was like in Chicago. It wasn't the full pregame, but we had a little bit of the pregame leading into it. Plus, we had all the commercials, and we'll get into that as well, but also the postgame, too. We had that postgame feed from the local Fox affiliate, which was outstanding to watch to wrap this thing all up. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. So let's hop into the game discussion. And I want to start with some outdated observations. We like to do this, go back and things that maybe didn't even have to do with the game, but stuff that we saw during the game that today is either funny or just seems out of place. So let's start with, to me, I think one of the big things was we got to see commercials for the first time, as I just talked about. One of the main sponsors for this was Sprint, and they were pushing their picture mail. Now, keep in mind, we're like 2 years from an iPhone, and they were pushing the fact that you could send a picture, like a thumbnail-sized picture on these little flip phones, to a friend, and it just seemed like the most difficult technology, and we're just 2 years away from having everything at our fingertips.
I couldn't put it any better in regards to, you go back and you think, oh, this is 2003, you know what I mean? By 07, 08, I'm pretty sure I had an iPhone.
Yeah.
And life just got a lot easier at that point, I guess. Don't really remember being that much inconvenience before the iPhone, but I remember what it's been like since, and it's been great, obviously. Also, did you notice the ad for America Online 9.0?
Did you realize there were 9 different iterations of that?
I did not. I did not realize there was 9 different iterations of America Online. And wow, just to think that they were still a main player, even in 2003 surprised me. Because it seems like light years ago that they were relevant.
Yeah, I'd love to go back and look to see actually how many versions they had, because this is right around the time where they were fading out. And we talked about it on a previous episode where keywords was a big thing. They promoted AOL keywords on one of the CBS, the Tuck Rule game back in episode 2 that we talked about. But it shows you kind of how much that the iPhone changed everything, because it just changed the entire way that we consume media, how we search for media, and all of that. I mean, it was AOL was a huge player at this point, but only a couple of years away from almost being irrelevant. I mean, they still have a website and stuff, but they were the way to get into the internet when we were growing up.
Yeah, the dial-up internet. I mean, go look up. If you're not familiar with dial-up internet, just go to YouTube, type in dial-up internet America Online, and look at the way that you should have to get online. And not to mention that if someone picked up the phone while you were on the internet, it kicked you off the internet.
I totally forgot about that. That's true. You would be so pissed at your sibling for getting on the phone and booting you off your chat room or whatever you were in.
Yeah, there was no need to have controls on the internet to keep your kid off the internet, because you could just pick up the phone and get him off.
That simple. The other outdated thing I loved was Old Navy had an ad going on throughout, okay? And that's common. No big surprise there. But they were pushing one product during this game, and it was the Painter's Pants. The Old Navy Painter's Pants was their huge product in 2003. I am proud to say I never owned a pair of Painter's Pants. What about you?
Well, maybe in Birmingham, those Painter's Pants weren't popular, but I can tell you right now, where I grew up in the Northeast, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have at least one pair of Painter's jeans. And to go along with it, at least one Old Navy performance fleece. Maybe it was a cold weather thing. Maybe the fleece just matched those Painter's Pants so much they were irresistible to buy. But yeah, Painter's jeans, man. Again, something that doesn't seem that long ago, but crazy.
I wonder if those will ever come back in style. I kind of feel like they probably will at some point. We've even seen like Jinko jeans come back in style, but I'd be shocked if Painter's Pants do. God, it was such an ugly fashion statement during our time in college, man. I don't know how we got through that at all. One other thing was the green screen boards at Wrigley. I was surprised. I thought this technology came around a little bit later, more like 2007 or 8. But they had the green screen boards up for this, and were able to throw ads up behind home plate. So that kind of surprised me about this game. Anything else you saw from this one that was outdated that caught your eye?
No, that you about covered it, man. A lot I had America Online 9.0 circled in my notes. I want to make sure we got to that.
You love America Online. And it's going to be like a common theme, I think, through this show as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
All right, let's get into the broadcast. I mentioned Fox was the broadcaster, had the rights for this game. They still do a lot of baseball, so that's not a surprise. But Tom Brenneman, Steve Lyons, and Al Leiter were on the call. Pretty solid team.
Yeah, Brenneman, the straight shooter, play-by-play guy. Steve Lyons, sort of the little kooky analyst type guy. At one point in this game, on a 3-2 count to Jeff Conine, in a pretty important part of the game. It wasn't the 8th inning, but an important part of the game. 3-2 count on Conine. He's going into the fact about how Jeff Conine's a world-class racquetball player. You know what I mean? So he's one of those guys. Like, he has something down in his notes, and he's going to say it no matter what. And then you had Leiter. He was a player. Sort of dissecting things from a player's point of view. I thought for a team that was obviously thrown together for the playoffs, they were pretty good. You had Josh Lewin on the sidelines. I don't know if do you know who Josh Lewin is?
No.
He's the guy he's probably most well known. He just got off the Mets. He was the Mets play-by-play guy on the radio along with Howie Rose for a couple years. Okay. He recently left that job, but he's probably best known for calling a lot of LaDainian Tomlinson's touchdown runs when he's with the Chargers.
I gotcha.
If you listen to it, you'll know his voice when you hear it. But he was on the sideline in this game, or whatever you call it in baseball, standing in the camera well there. But I was surprised to hear his voice on this.
So Fox, pretty good broadcast. Nothing seemed out of line for that one. So let's get into the actual game. The managers, Dusty Baker for the Cubs. Dusty, look, he's had his moments through the years. He kind of always seems to have his team on the cusp of a World Series and maybe a title or championship. We've seen it at multiple stops and seemed to be the case in this one. But I guess you look back on this one, Dusty Baker probably can't take a lot of the blame in this game. But again, it seemed like he had everything in line to get this Cubs the World Series and just couldn't do it.
Yeah, Dusty's one of those guys that I wouldn't say I only root for my own teams. I'm not that kind of guy that just roots for a team because I feel like I have to root for a team to watch a game. But I always liked Dusty. And it seems like he could just never get over the hump. It seems like the players like him. He didn't make any glaring mistakes in this game, I can tell you that much. If anything, we'll get to a little bit later, Mckeon made some questionable moves, but obviously in the end it all worked out for him. And Mckeon, Trader Jack, one of the most memorable moments of these playoffs was him in the World Series in the dugout afterwards with that cigar. That's still a clip that's played today.
Yeah, and Mckeon, he was kind of like a stopgap type manager for a lot of teams. I mean, you look back at his career and his history, a couple of years at the Royals, 2 years with the A's, 3 years with the Padres, 4 years with the Reds, and he was taking 4, 5, 6 years off, 10 years off between stops. He ended up back with the Marlins after a few years off. This was his first year back as a manager, an older gentleman at the time, and both him and Baker were first-year managers. But, he came in and got the job done, and he'll forever be remembered by Marlins fans for what he was able to accomplish.
Yeah, hey, he got it done. They won the World Series this year, obviously, and I think as a whole, if you look back on their careers, Dusty probably the better manager, just with worse luck.
Oh yeah, no question. Lineups for this game, looking through this, my first reaction was kind of surprised at how average it seemed like the Cubs lineup was. Now, granted, this was 2003. Sosa was still kind of the heart of this order, but you look at guys like Randall Simon at first base, Paul Bacco at catcher. This lineup to me left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, Bacco, Mark Grudzelanek, Randall Simon. These are guys you don't think of being in formidable positions here on a team that's poised to go to the World Series. This was right in the middle, though. I think we forget because of what Sammy Sosa's been through since. This is right in the middle of Sammy Sosa 9 straight 100 RBI seasons. So he carried a lot of that offensive weight for this team.
Yeah, and they had a good middle of the order, Sosa, Alou, and then Ramirez, who was a young player at the time and had just come over from Pittsburgh that season. So he was kind of the future for that team. I think they expected a lot out of him, and he did produce quite a bit. So the heart of the order was good. Over on the other side, the Marlins, again, you had a mix of young and old. You had Pudge Rodriguez, the veteran, Mike Lowell, who went on, with the Red Sox, and Jeff Conine, your boy Jeff Conine. And then on the young guys,
Marlin,
you had
Mr. Marlin. You have to refer to him as the world-class racquetball player, Mr. Marlin, Jeff Conine.
Mr. Marlin, indeed. He was batting, seventh in this game. And then you had Miguel Cabrera, one of the young stars, kind of up and coming. We didn't know how good he would be at this point, but he was hitting fourth, hitting cleanup for this team, and then Derek Lee. So I thought, though, most impressed to me was the top of the order for both these teams. I mean, you had two really elite leadoff guys. Juan Pierre for the Marlins, a guy that stole a ton of bases. I think he stole over 60 this season, 2003. And then the other side, you had Kenny Lofton, who was both a great defensive player, really great leadoff hitter, was towards the end of his career here in this game. But he was around so long, and it seemed like he bounced around to so many teams because he was a guy that just had so much value to a lineup when it came to the postseason that he bounced around so much over the course of the year. I mean, you look at his career, he was on 8 or 9 different teams. I don't think he played after he left Cleveland in 2001. He didn't even play on the same team back-to-back years over the next almost decade. But he was that elite guy. But that stood out to me was how good the top of the order were for these two teams.
Yeah, not only the top of the order stuck out to me because it was sort of the old school way to build a lineup. You had Lofton at the top of the lineup for the Cubs, the quintessential leadoff guy. And then you had Juan Pierre and Luis Castillo, who hit second for the Marlins, sort of those old school table setters before the days of analytics. And you mentioned Pudge Rodriguez, maybe not what you think of as a third place hitter, traditionally, but in these playoffs, I mean, he was the best player for the Marlins, hands down. He had a great division series. He's one of those rare guys that had great division series and a good NLCS. He would eventually be MVP of this series. And Pudge was, clutch hit after clutch hit in these games. Up to this point, the Marlins had 9 playoff games, and he hit safely in all 9 games.
Yeah, he was really good at this time and really a great pro for sure and was the heartbeat of this lineup. So let's get into the game right now and talk about the actual play on the field. So as we mentioned, a lot of energy coming out. Mark Pryor takes the mound. Gets off to a good start. I mean, he gives up a single and a walk in that first inning to Luis Castillo, another good guy at the top of the order for the Marlins. And then Pudge walks, but he's able to get Miguel Cabrera to fly out and then get a strikeout to Derek Lee to make way for the Cubs to come up. And the Cubs do what they do. Single by Lofton. They get a double by Sosa. Lofton scores, and all of a sudden it's 1-0, and that place is going crazy.
Yeah, did you notice they bunted the guy over?
Yeah.
They bunted, they bunted Lofton over. I mean, with Carl Pavano pitching, Pavano was solid, but it's not like he was, it's not like he was some frontline ace. Why the need to scratch out one run in the first inning against Carl Pavano, I don't know. But it worked out for him here. So with a clutch hit, like you said, and 1-0 Cubs.
I'm glad you mentioned Pavano. Now, Pavano was 12-13 this season. He would actually have a really good year the next year and go 18-8 for the Marlins. But I thought it was interesting.
He'd parlay that into the big contract with the Yankees.
Yeah, and did not deliver at all for the Yankees. But I thought it was interesting in this game, and this more of kind of an inside for me and you, having had our background in Connecticut. You still live in Connecticut, but the broadcast referred to Carl Pavano from Southington, Connecticut.
Yes, I live in Southington, or as we call it up here, Southington, Connecticut. And Brenneman actually redeemed himself later in the game and said the name of the town right. Someone must have gotten his ear and let him know that he screwed it up. But yes, so I do live now in the hometown of Carl Pavano, and it's still talked about, believe it or not, even though he hasn't really been relevant here in a while as a baseball player. But people will let you know that Carl Pavano went to the local high school.
I thought that was great in Connecticut. They really would. I mean, that was the local kind of hero in that area was Carl Pavano. I always thought that was funny, but Brenneman slipped up there at the beginning, and you would not have even had any idea, except for the 5,000 people that live in Southington or have been around Southington at some point and gone to the Groggy Frog. But let's move forward in this game a little bit. There wasn't a whole lot really to get into over the course of this game. There was kind of a little bit of back and forth. Both pitchers kind of settled in after that first inning. They were both a little shaky, but you saw Pryor really lock in and get after those Marlin hitters. And it wasn't until that 6th inning where the Cubs actually added on another run.
Yeah, so the Cubs made it 2-0 in that 6th inning. Dontrell Willis actually came in relief of Pavano in this inning. And Mckeon, this is the first move where I said before where Mckeon made some questionable moves. This was the first one for me. You had Pavano cruising along, two outs in this inning. He's due to face Randall Simon, of all people. And he takes Pavano out to put Dontrell Willis in, and then the counter move by the Cubs is they pinch hit Eric Karros for Randall Simon. So I thought a little overthinking here by Mckeon. It cost him, like you said. Sosa, when Sosa was up, Dontrelle Willis had the pass ball, and 2-0 Cubs.
Yeah, Dontrelle, keep in mind, Dontrelle, Rookie of the Year in 2003, had a really good season, 14-6. He took on more of a bullpen reliever role, but he would have a really nice 3 or 4 years for the Marlins before he kind of just got too wild on the mound. But we saw a little bit of that in this game. So the Cubs go up 2-0 in the 6th. And we move to the 7th inning, first the top half. So you had, again, Pryor dealing. I mean, this guy showed every bit of the stuff that we anticipated seeing again and what we remembered from this guy, being a power pitcher, having just sharp movement on his breaking balls. And from about the 2nd inning until that 8th inning, this guy was nearly unhittable.
Yeah, he was, as they say these days, he was dealing. I mean, I'm trying to think of the guys in the playoffs this year that are really like top end pitchers. Whether it's a Garrett Cole, Verlander, Max Scherzer, guys like this. He was just as good during this time period as all those guys. And it's crazy to think that by 2007, this guy's out of baseball. But you bring up the 7th inning, the Cubs would go up 3-0 in the 7th inning, and Pryor batted in the 7th inning, laid down a sacrifice bunt, and the standing ovation he got from that crowd was incredible. I mean, I've never seen a guy get such a loud ovation for a sacrifice bunt.
I'm glad you said that because I had it on my list of things to talk about too because I was so surprised to see it. So Baco gets on with a single and they bring up Pryor to bunt. Now, see, obviously Pryor was rolling right along and there was no concern over him on the mound. So even though this was a 2-0 ball game and every run seemed to be huge for the Cubs as they were trying to get to the World Series, there was no even second thought about pulling Pryor out there and pinch hitting for him. He laid down that bunt and it looked like Jeter walking off the field for the final time for the Yankees. I mean, the standing ovation he got was like a guy coming off after throwing a no-hitter. I mean, it felt like the game was over. This was like a curtain call, like a celebration. But I mean, for the Cubs fans, obviously it was more of an appreciation, dude. You are putting us in position. You're doing your job. We appreciate you. Hell of a job on the mound tonight. But I thought that was a little bit kind of out of place too for what you would see in a game.
Yeah, it reminded me of like an older basketball player. You know when they take him out just so he could get the ovation at the end of the game? That's what it reminded me of. It's like, look, we still have 6 outs to get here to get where we want to go. And you're right. The way you just put it was perfect. It seemed out of place.
So Pryor lays on that bunt. You got Kenny Lofton strikes out. Then Grzelcyk gets a single to score Baco. And then all of a sudden, you got a 3-0 lead for the Cubs. And at that point, I mean, 3-0 with Pryor on the mound and them being so close to the World Series, it seemed like a lock. And staying in that 7th inning and backing up just a bit. So they got done with the top half of the 7th. The one thing that I remember specifically, and I still remember it to this day in that moment, it was that's the moment that Brenneman decided this is about to happen. Let's start the countdown. He mentioned going to break as they had like a wide shot, overhead shot of the field, as you could see like the street behind the left field bleachers where fans were all over, just packed like sardines out there. And he says, going to break, just 6 outs away from the World Series or something to that effect. And that's kind of when you knew, okay, Brenneman's locked in. This is kind of the moment. This is actually going to happen. I mean, you kind of felt that in the moment it was going to happen. And then it was the 7th inning stretch. What Fox stayed for and showed, and your boy Bernie Mac was the guy that's saying, and hey, God bless Synergy on TV. I think he had a Fox TV show, the Bernie Mac show at the time, so that's probably why they had him. He's from Chicago, but I felt like that would have been a great moment to bring an old Cubs player back or somebody that had a little deeper ties to that franchise when they were on the cusp of making the World Series than Bernie Mac.
Yeah. Bernie Mac, though, he was so freaking funny, man. I mean, and that show was funny. And, Bernie Mac referencing them as champs 3 or 4 times during his rendition of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. You look back on it and say, was that a jinx? But I don't believe in jinxes, but I know a lot of people do. And some people I've read around the internet, all the conspiracy theorists, think that was a little bit of a jinx job by Bernie Mac, referring to them as champs a couple times when he was singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. But like you said, the scene is just building up here. You have Brenneman setting the scene. When they're coming in and out of commercial breaks, they're showing like the picture of the last Cubs team to make the World Series, a picture of the last Cubs team to win the World Series, a picture of that dopey goat. You know what I mean? Like you just have all this stuff. It's building up and building up and building up. Then the Bernie Mac Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and now we head into that memorable 8th inning.
Yeah, and if you're looking for something to watch in this part of this game, like spots to go to, obviously the 8th, but go back to that 7th inning stretch because it's unlike anything you'll see these days because it seemed like every other fan had a sign, World Series, reverse the curse, whatever it was. It felt like a college game day background, like a set with how many signs. It's unlike anything you'll see now. And really, it stood out to me going back and watching it. So just watch that part. If you're going to watch the 8th, start with like the 7th inning and watch from there. So let's go into the 8th inning. And as I mentioned, Pryor had retired 8 straight leading up to this inning. Was lights out. Really, there wasn't any true good contact made on Pryor over the 2 or 3 innings prior to this. And, you go into this really thinking, okay, just get it done. 1 out at a time, just keep on moving, and everything will be fine. And he does that right out of the gates. Top of the 8th, gets a fly ball from Mike Mordecai to start the inning. So, again, Brenneman, 5 outs from the World Series. You kind of feel it. He's building it up again. Back to the top of the order. Pryor faces Juan Pierre. Pierre doubles down the left field line, and this is the first time that you kind of felt, and again, it's a 3-run game. Pryor is dealing. He hadn't really been hit much to this point. Pierre gets his base hit, and you kind of feel like this kind of deep breath, a little bit of energy sucked out of Wrigley Field. Like they were waiting for that first shoe to drop, and that was kind of it.
And that's how that's how the Cubs fan base was back then. Happy-go-lucky, happy-go-lucky, happy-go-lucky. Something bad happens, oh no. And back then the Red Sox fans were the exact same way. They were just waiting for something bad to happen. And it started with this Pierre double. And then obviously the at-bat of the game with Luis Castillo next.
Yeah, Castillo comes up, and him and Pryor are having a pretty good at-bat, and that's when Castillo fouls one off left side. So this ball drifts over. You've seen it. I don't have to get into it too much, but it drifts over. A few different fans reach out for it. It obviously hits off the hands of Steve Bartman, and Moises Alou, the left fielder for the Cubs, is right there in position to look like to make the catch. Every review and angle that we've seen looks like he would have probably made that catch at least probably 99 times out of 100 with the position he was in. And immediately as that ball bounces away and into the stands, he reacts like the season just ended. And I remember in that moment thinking, okay, that was a foul ball, just another strike. Cubs are still in a good spot. But the way that Alou just reacted, maybe this is a huge moment in this game. You felt it pretty quickly, but that reaction told me he knew in that moment that play might end up costing him the game.
Yeah, and a couple things about this play. That foul ball by Castillo was on the 8th pitch of the at-bat. So it was a great at-bat by Castillo. And, when it initially happened, I remember saying to myself, did a fan touch that? And then you saw Alou's reaction, and you're like, a fan must have touched it. Then they showed the replay. And in showing the replay when we rewatched the game, I couldn't help but think that the guy sitting right next to Bartman might have got a little bit of a free pass here. Because maybe he wasn't as memorable as Bartman. But it looked like he interfered with that play a little bit. Obviously not as much as Bartman, but... And then also, credit to the announcers for being on this from the drop. You know what I mean? They were on it. They were saying that how big of a deal it was in the game from right the first moment.
Yeah.
A lot of times with these big moments in these games that we've done, the announcers sort of don't have a sense of the moment, but these guys did. And this inning was a very long inning, and that was a main storyline that they kept on referring to throughout the whole inning.
Yeah, so 2 things. First, the other fan that you mentioned, I think he was wearing a gray shirt. I don't think anybody's avoided disaster like this guy has. He might be the luckiest dude I've ever seen because he was literally inches away from that story being about him. But how fitting was it that Bartman, if you could drop any guy, and, look, this thing's been rehashed over and over and over, and thankfully kind of being put behind him and the Cubs organization. But could you have drawn it up any better to have this guy be that guy in the seat to make that play?
You couldn't have. If you developed a character that looked like him and put him in a movie about someone who ruined a game for their favorite team, you could, between the turtleneck and he's the guy who listens to the broadcast while he's at the game. He's that big. We all know that guy. He's that big a fan. He's doing that. And then also, I always wonder this. When he's listening to the radio broadcast, are the radio broadcasters also saying, like, what was this guy thinking touching the ball? I've never heard the radio broadcast, but...
I had not even thought about that.
Yeah, like, is he saying, like, oh, my God, like, everyone knows it was me. He would have caught the ball if I didn't touch it. Oh, no, I'm a huge Cubs fan. I have my turtleneck on. What did I do?
He's like, yeah, they definitely know it was me. Like, there's no way I'm hiding from this. But maybe he just turned it off and just left the headphones on and just did not listen the rest of the way. I don't know. I never thought about that until this moment. But God, what would he have been hearing? Because this game quickly escalated, and I can't imagine what that radio call was like that he was listening to from this point forward. Because, look, Castillo was still, even after this strike, which is all it was still a 3-2 count. Pryor still had a chance to get out of this at bat. Now, granted, you saw as soon as Alou reacted, it forced Pryor to react too.
Yeah, Pryor reacted. I think that's what made the fans react, because as this inning goes on now, you have the initial a-hole chance for Bartman right out of the gate, and then as the inning goes on, and as the announcers on the broadcast hit on, he's getting ridiculed and he's getting things yelled at him from the fans surrounding him. And I think it all stems from that Alou reaction. He didn't give this guy a break at all, but I can't blame Alou in the moment. If he thought he could have caught that ball, I can't blame him for his raw reaction right afterwards.
Yeah, and he did. I mean, the Cubs dugout could not see it. Dusty Baker after the game said that, because where the ball was, they couldn't see actually what happened. They actually talked to Alou, after that inning was over, hey, what happened over there? And he said he was there. And then all of a sudden the ball just disappeared and it got knocked away, and he was in position to make that play. But so Pryor ends up walking Castillo. So Pryor was shook up to, it was in everybody's head at this moment. So now it's first and second. And still, 1 out, still a 3-run lead. You think, okay, still in position, because if there's one guy you'd want in this spot, I think Pryor's still that pitcher. He was a very kind of stoic guy for the most part, very determined. He seemed like the guy you'd want on the mound when things are going bad to kind of steady the ship and get everybody back on track. But that wasn't the case. Next at bat, Pudge Rodriguez, we talked about it. He had an incredible playoff run. It continued here. He singled. Pierre scored, Castillo advanced, and then the biggest play probably of the inning, honestly, we talk about Bartman, but the biggest play was Miguel Cabrera comes up, hits a chopper to shortstop. Alex Gonzalez, getting set to throw to second to get that force out for the second out of the inning, bobbles the ball, drops it on a play that he routinely makes, and that turns out to be the bigger play of the inning.
Yeah, it's a classic case of Gonzalez just picked the wrong time not to look the ball all the way into his glove. That's all that happened there. I mean, you had the play with Gonzalez. If that goes a different way, who knows what happens. You mentioned the base hit by Pudge to score Pierre to make it 3-1. It was at that point the score still 3-0, and he had Pudge 0-2. And I've heard Pryor speak in defense. I've read an article he's speaking in defense of Bartman, and Pryor saying, well, Bartman didn't hang a curveball to Pudge on that next at bat to sort of get the ball rolling on then coming back, So there was a lot of moments in this inning other than the Bartman interference that had they gone a different way, we may not even care about Steve Bartman or even ever know his name.
Yeah, it should have been the case, but it wasn't. Then Derek Lee, future Cub Derek Lee, doubled down the left field line with the bases loaded and scored a couple of runs, and that was it for Mark Pryor. So he went from being a hero in Chicago, being maybe one of the city's all-time favorite players, to not becoming the GOAT. He still pitched pretty well, but left that game 3-3. And without that Cabrera reach on an error, this game's probably just 3-2 at this point. They had to walk Mike Lowell, and then Jeff Conine gets a sac fly, and that's when they take the lead 4-3. So they probably would have been out of the inning at that point without the Gonzalez error. But we continue on. Mike Mordecai, the guy that got the first out of this inning, comes back up with the bases loaded. And again, if you got to face one guy in the spot, you got to feel pretty good as a Cubs fans that Mike Mordecai is the guy up at the plate. Hey, it's still 4-3. We get out of this inning, but no.
And he already made an out at this inning.
Yeah, first out of the inning.
Yeah.
And he comes back up with the bases loaded. And I thought it was funny, too, because the announcers kind of called the shot here.
Yeah, the announcers, they were making reference to how Kyle Farnsworth, who's now the pitcher for the Cubs, is throwing hard, and Mordecai's a fastball hitter, and Mordecai just crushed one in the gap and cleared the bases.
He stroked it too, man. I thought it was a grand slam. Even going back and watch it again, it looked like he hit it so well. But that was basically it. I mean, 7-3. They had one more run with Pierre, another base hit, and then Castillo into the inning. And all of a sudden, it went from 3-0, Cubs leading, 5 outs away from a World Series, to 8-3, Cubs trailing. We're going to a Game 7, and no one in Wrigley had their head up. The turn of events from Bernie Mac singing that seventh inning, the seventh inning stretch, and then Mark Pryor's standing ovation to where we are, 20 minutes later, is incredible. But that's where we were, and we went to the ninth, and really, bottom of the eighth first, Cubs went quietly, 3 up, 3 down. There really was nothing else in this game. I mean, it was just 9 straight outs from that point forward. The Cubs showed no life. Nobody seemed to care at that point. Everybody knew things were over. And looking back on it, you could just tell by everybody's reaction, the expressions, that this series was over as soon as that inning ended.
Yeah, I mean, that devastated. Even before the Mordecai bases clearing hit, which was just the nail in the coffin, even when they went down 4-3 after that Conine sac fly, just the faces on these fans, it was really incredible. I can't think of another example of that happening that I've seen live. You know, I could think of some Super Bowls where obviously teams came back, but you're not at your home stadium during a Super Bowl. You know, these fans were just, I mean, the Fox cameramen relentless. I mean, it seemed like they hit every fan who had a puss on in the stands. And look, I felt myself watching this game, even though I knew what was coming. And maybe it's because I root for teams that don't win, but I found myself feeling bad for the fans in the stands, and I knew what was coming.
Yeah, I mean, how could you not, right? I mean, looking back on it. But a couple of things there late in the game, a couple observations. So first thing, I don't know if you caught this stat. Going to break, after the 8th inning ended, the Cubs were down still 8-3. Fox says, I think it was Brenneman, the Cubs had lost 67 straight games when trailing after 8 innings. I went back and had to rewind it and make sure he said 67 straight, because I don't know how a team, especially a team that's in the playoffs, could lose that many games and never come back in the 9th inning.
Especially when it's not like relief pitching was any better back then than it is now. You still had teams come back every night, on bullpens that stunk around Major League Baseball. That is an incredible stat, and that is one I did not pick up on during this game. That's insane.
And the other part of this was because this game was so bad, those final 9 outs, that this whole game became about Steve Bartman. I mean, the conversation was, I thought it was funny because they thought he was a kid at first, probably based on the way he was dressed, smaller guy. But they talked about, man, I hope he can go to work on Monday and not be harassed. Like, let this guy, live his life. Little did we know at that time that he was going to be the GOAT and the curse on the Cubs moving forward until they would win the World Series a decade later. So that became the thing. Like, it was already bad enough, but they, again, then had an inning and a half to talk nothing but that play and that guy.
Yeah, they literally were. That was the dominant conversation point, and it was more the 3 announcers just coming to the defense of Bartman preemptively, sort of knowing what was coming for that poor guy. And it got you to kind of feel when you're watching the game where you start to feel bad for Bartman, because these fans in the immediate aftermath of this are not going to be rational at all.
No, they weren't. And they actually had to have security come. They mentioned it on the broadcast. Security came and helped him out, escorted him out of the park. Probably the sooner the better they did that because as soon as that inning was over, I mean, he had to be the target of everyone around there. But Cubs lost 8-3. That evened up the series 3-3. They went back to Wrigley with Kerry Wood on the mound. Still felt pretty good. I mean, it was kind of a weird feeling because you still had Kerry Wood on the mound, but after what you just witnessed, I don't think anybody felt like they had a good chance to win that. Even though they had the better pitching matchup in that game, I don't think anybody felt like that was their spot. And of course, the Marlins still, after the way they came in, all you want to see as a Cubs fan is Kerry Wood come in, just get to that first inning. Just get 3 outs. Let's settle into this Game 7. And then let's try to take over with our home field advantage. What happens? The Marlins, who had not scored in the first inning through the first 6 games of the series, come out and score 3 runs in the first, and boy, was that just a kick in the gut.
Yeah, and you actually had the Cubs come back later and take the lead at one point in this game. And what this Game 6 and 7 reminded me of was the '86 World Series, where you had a legendary play win the game for the Mets in Game 6. Then the Mets came back in Game 7. The Red Sox had a lead in that Game 7 as well, and the Mets obviously end up winning. Same kind of thing with the Cubs and Marlins. You had the catastrophic, Bartman kerfuffle and the 8-run 8th inning in Game 6. Then you come back in Game 7, you get a lead, and you still end up losing anyway. So it's sort of a double kick in the you-know-what.
Yeah, this was peak Cubs because they had the lead. They were about 5 outs away from World Series, lose that game, then go down 3-0, then come back, get a 5-3 lead before giving up 6 straight runs to the Marlins and going down 9-5. And at that point, it was all over, and Kerry Wood lost that game. And the crazy part was you had Kerry Wood going up against Mark Redmond. Mark Redmond, for the Marlins, and they still found a way to lose that game in that outing. So that was the game. Let's transition into post-game and so with some observations and takeaways. Let's start with, kind of how this impacted both teams. With the Cubs, this was, at this moment, the Cubs seem like if you had to pick a team like, hey, who do you want to invest in over the next 5 or 10 years? The Cubs are probably going to be in the top 3 teams that you would probably pick at this time. And then all of a sudden, this franchise was back to square one.
Yeah, it was a classic case of, when a young team makes it pretty far in the playoffs, doesn't get where they want to be, and you say, oh, they'll be back next year.
Right.
This is just the beginning of something special. And it just goes to show that, when you're there and you have the opportunity, you need to capitalize on it because you never know when or if it'll come again. And this Cubs team's a cautionary tale for sure.
So we mentioned the Marlins, again, Mckeon, first year, win a World Series. They had a really good nucleus, but like the Marlins have done, they kind of build for that one moment and then just blow it all up. And since that time, the Marlins have not been in the playoff. Pretty amazing to see with that group they had there, especially with Miguel Cabrera, Josh Beckett, Dontrelle Willis, a lot of guys that you were excited about at that time. Since that point, 0.
Yeah, you had Josh Beckett, who ended up being the MVP of the World Series that year, and they just tore it down. I mean, they did exactly what they did after the 1997 World Series. It's just that in between, 2003 and present day, they haven't sort of had any more blips where they were one of the better teams in the league. They probably had a chance a couple years ago when they had the Christian Yelich, Giancarlo Stanton, Marcell Ozuna team. They probably had a chance to maybe be on the come up then, but obviously they had a change in ownership and they decided to tear things down even more. But yeah, it's just been a franchise that, honestly, as a fan of a team that's more a traditional team like the Mets, you kind of get mad when you see a team like the Marlins win 2 World Series because, you know what I mean? Just because, I don't know that anyone cares that they won 2 World Series. I'm sure there are Florida Marlins fans out there that care, but just the way that organization went about things and has gone about things since sort of leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
So from that time, let's look at some of the players and people in this game where they've been since. We mentioned Mark Pryor. He was the story going in. He was really the savior in Chicago, I think, for a lot of people. He's going to be the guy that came in there and revitalized that franchise and took them to the next level. And as you talked about, Pryor went 18-6, and then 2004, battled injuries, the start of the decline of his career. He'd win 11 games in 2005, throwing 166 innings. But as you said, 2006, that was it. He was out of baseball. He tried to battle back a little bit, but he went from a star at 22 in this game to out of baseball by 25.
Yeah, and if you want to know why the pitcher on your favorite team, the new hotshot pitcher, when he comes up, why he has innings limits, why he has pitch limits, why Steven Strasburg pitches his entire, rookie year and then doesn't pitch in the playoffs, I think you could trace it back to Mark Pryor, because this is a guy, you could trace all of his problems back to a little bit of a quirky windup and a guy who was just flat overused. This is a guy, think about this happening in this day and age, his first full season in the major leagues averaged the most pitches per start in the major leagues. I can tell you right now, that'll never happen again in Major League Baseball.
Never. Kerry Wood, the other big starter for this team, he was 26 in 2003. 2003, he had 266 strikeouts for the Cubs, won 14 games. But again, after this year, he was basically a non-factor. He pitched 140 innings in 2004, only won 8 games. But after that, it was all injuries. And I was kind of surprised. I'd forgotten about this, but he was still in baseball up until 2012 with the Indians, the Cubs, the Yankees for a brief stop, and then back with the Cubs. I'd forgotten that he was still in the majors until 35.
Didn't he? He was a reliever for the Indians, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only place I remember him being after the Cubs, and I barely remember it. And what Kerry Wood's known for is that 20 strikeout game he had. That's all I think of when I think of Kerry Wood. I can't think of one other. I'm sure a Cubs fan could tell me some other good moments he had, but I can't really think of any.
No, he was peak at this point. over 200 strikeouts for 4 of his first 5 seasons that he played in. He was out his 99 year because of injuries. But again, same thing for him as Pryor. The Cubs had two of the top starters in the game in 2003, and then 2 years later, it was basically Zambrano and then a bunch of makeshift guys again, and it's been that way a lot ever since until they finally won the World Series. Who else in this game? We saw Beckett went on to some big things, obviously the MVP in this series. He would go on to the Red Sox and have a really, really good career just as he was kind of picking up steam with the Marlins.
Yeah, Beckett was one of those casualties of the teardown. I believe they traded him for Hanley Ramirez, if I'm not mistaken. I believe Hanley was a prospect in the Red Sox organization at that time. And also, the best player from this game, it's not even close, ended up being Miguel Cabrera, who, let's just say, looked different when he was 20 years old as compared to what he looks like now. But who doesn't? I'm not one to talk. But
right. Me neither.
But he was he was a free swinger in this game. He learned some plate discipline. He just became an absolute monster. It's probably one of the best right-handed hitters I've ever seen.
Yeah, for sure. The managers in this game, too. Jack Mckeon, as I mentioned, he would only stay with the Marlins through 2005. He came back in 2011 and managed them one more year, try to bring back a little bit of that magic as he was kind of a stopgap for the next manager that came in there. But Jack Mckeon, he now lives in North Carolina. He had a grandson that I think was an athlete at Duke. But I thought the most interesting fact about Jack Mckeon was that he was inducted into the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame in 2015.
Wow. Where is the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame?
Brother, I don't even know.
Who else is in it? Do you have any other names of any other guys?
He got inducted along with Bill Murray the year that he went in.
Bill Murray, the actor?
Yes. I don't know what his connection is besides being a big baseball fan. Maybe that's his connection.
I'm trying to think of some other good Irish baseball players.
Well, you'd be thinking for a while because Al Leiter actually was a part of the last class that went in, who was actually part of this broadcast team. He went in with Casey Stengel. But, I mean, you look back through these classes, and the last one they actually have listed on the website is 2017. But you had Tim McCarver, another guy that's in this. Nolan Ryan. I mean, I don't even know what these guys – I had no idea Nolan Ryan was Irish. I guess if you have any bit of Irish in you, you can get in this. But, yeah, that's the fun fact for this episode.
Do any of these guys know, besides Jack Mckeon, who I'm guessing he's really into the fact that he got inducted into any Hall of Fame, but does Nolan Ryan even know he's in the Irish Baseball Hall of Fame?
You don't think he went to the ceremony?
No. Something tells me old Nolan did not leave Texas to go to the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame.
Hey, how about the inaugural class in 2008? Had Kevin Costner, Sean Casey, Mark McGwire were the headliners.
Mark McGwire got into a Hall of Fame. That's the breaking news there. Might be the only one he ever gets into. But, yeah, and Kevin Costner. That's great. That's great.
And somehow Vin Scully got in the next year. How does Vin Scully not get in the first year of the Irish Baseball Hall of Fame? Unbelievable. We could do a whole episode on the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame.
Man, we got to go. We should do it live from the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame.
We'll have to research that moving forward. Dusty Baker, as you know, would go on and manage the Nationals. He had a really good run with. He'd go to the Reds right after the Cubs. He'd be with Chicago through 2006 and then went on. Again, had some really good teams, had some chances to get through, both with the Reds and the Nationals, but never got it done for either one of those two teams. Let's go through some what-ifs here. How does history change in this game if a play or two goes the other way? So I got a couple for you, and the obvious one is what if Alou makes that catch? So we're not going to talk about that one. But let's go bottom of the seventh. Alou, again, was at the plate with runners on first and third. If he gets a base hit there and makes it 4-0, this game has a completely different feel. Granted, you get a 4-4 game. They're still in it, too, with that Conine sac fly. But I thought that was a huge at-bat that he didn't deliver on, where I think the Cubs would have expected him to, and I think he probably kind of kicked himself for not delivering there.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, they could have used any insurance runs they could have gotten, right? So, in hindsight, yeah, I mean, if he comes through there, maybe the way Pryor pitches to all the batters in that inning changes. A lot changes when you go from being up 3 runs to 4 runs. I agree with that.
Another one that I didn't have on my list until we had this conversation was, what if Alou doesn't react the way that he does in the 8th on that missed foul ball? What if that ball bounces in the stands, right off Bartman's hands, and he just trots back over to his position and lets that game go on? Doesn't distract Pryor, doesn't get the fans worked up. Do you think Pryor settles in at all and there's a different feel at that moment?
What I think doesn't happen is I don't think there may be the reaction after the game towards Bartman, after people who were in the stands get a chance to see the replay. But I don't think the reaction to Bartman, the visceral reaction, calling him an a-hole, screaming at him during the rest of the game, I don't think that stuff happens. And yeah, I think Alou's reaction, like you're saying, got sort of everyone all flustered. The fans were flustered. Alou was flustered. I think, a guy like Mark Pryor, who had such a good makeup on the mound, I think it impacted him a little bit. And you could trace it all back to Alou's reaction. On the flip side of that, I can't blame Alou for that reaction. I mean, he's an athlete. He's plugging away. He gets all the way over to the line, to the stands, and has that happen. I don't think I could be measured in that moment either.
No way. We mentioned Alex Gonzalez. If he makes that play, I think that inning turns out completely different. At worst case scenario, I think they're tied, but they probably have a lead still, leaving that eighth inning. And then the other one is that I have is, what if the Cubs win that game? Do you think the Cubs, again, the Marlins beat the Yankees in the World Series this year? Do you think the Cubs would have beat the Yankees in that World Series?
Well, with the way the Yankees ended up playing in that World Series, maybe. But first of all, that series would have been a ratings bonanza. I mean, you would have had... You would have had the Yankees coming off of denying the Red Sox the chance to alleviate their curse. And then now the big bad Yankees rolling into Wrigley and trying to do the same to the Cubs. That would have been huge.
So let's go social. What would this game have been like had social media been around in this age? We were only a few years away from social media. We were just getting the very first taste of picture mail and text messages as Sprint was advertising throughout. So Bartman obviously would have been the big story on social media, no question about that. But to me, I think, now keep in mind, the internet was still around. We act like this was forever ago. But Bartman's home address and his name were both posted online at some point after this game. I don't know how immediate, but that information did get out. So I think cops had to go over his house to kind of protect him and act as security for him as his name was getting out there. But I think about how this would have been different if social media was around. I picture the videos of him leaving with fans throwing stuff at him. I picture all the different angles from the stands of that ball bouncing off his hands. The guy that probably almost had that ball, his name probably gets out there as well, and he's probably spread around. I just think about how much more this would have exploded had that happened, and we would have known everything about him before this game was even over, like where he worked. We would have had his social media accounts. We would have had his Twitter handle, like turtleneck33, whatever it would have been. It just would have been blown up even more so than it was.
Yeah, his social media. I mean, this guy's life was ruined enough, by the way, even without technology and social media. But his social media would have got blown up. There would have been, you could have went to YouTube right now and typed in Bartman Game 6, and instead of seeing the replays of the games like we saw, you would have saw all cell phone videos of what went down in the moment with Bartman. Another thing on social media that I think would have absolutely crushed was they played in this game, one of the commercials was the classic Derek Jeter, George Steinbrenner Visa commercial. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was during this game as well. I think that would have killed on social media because it was the first time you really got a glimpse of George Steinbrenner, like not being all serious, and sort of making light. For those of you who are not aware, during this time period, the Yankees owner, George Steinbrenner, got on Derek Jeter publicly because he thought Jeter was maybe hanging out and partying too much. And they made a commercial sort of spoofing that whole scenario with Visa. And it was, back then it was like thought to be the funniest commercial ever. So,
yeah, no question. The other thing I think we might have seen a lot on social media was, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I don't think we made as big a deal out of it as we maybe could have. And that's the fact that we were essentially one game away from having a Cubs-Red Sox World Series with both these teams in a drought. I think that would have been a huge, huge conversation on social media. All the scenarios and what-ifs about Cubs and Red Sox playing in the World Series and, all the assumptions. And I think the other thing would be one of my favorite Twitter accounts, Old Takes Exposed, would have been going wild on this because the freezing cold takes would have been all over the place when the Cubs were 6 outs away, everybody crowning them. Dusty Baker, greatest manager to ever play in Chicago. Pryor can't lose. You can't hit Pryor. All this stuff would have taken place, and that account would have had a heyday.
That is a great Twitter account. Such a simple concept, but they knock it out of the park always.
And there's always content.
There's always, and now at this point, they probably have people feeding them content because everyone's looking to burn people on Twitter.
Let's wrap it up with what if I told you. We talk about, we thought some scenarios that actually happened, but what if I would have told you in the moment when this game happened that this would have been the case? So what if I told you that the Cubs would make the playoffs just twice over the next 12 years with that pitching staff they had on the mound that year?
What if I told you that, bridging off that pitching staff, that Mark Pryor, as I said before, would be completely out of baseball by 2007? I still can't get over that. I know we already talked about it, but it's still insane to me with how dominant he was. If you haven't, I know Ben mentioned this before, but if you haven't seen this game and saw how electrifying he was against what we said before was a very good Marlins lineup, go back and watch it. Go to our website, watch it, because it was something to behold.
And then what if I told you, I got one more for you. What if I told you the Marlins would have just 4 winning seasons over the next 16 years to the current day and not make another playoff after what they accomplished in 2003?
What I would tell you is that their owners stink, their stadiums stink, and their fans stink, so I'm not surprised. That's what I would have told you.
You're not surprised. Not at all. But Jeter's turning things around down there, right?
Yeah, I mean, everyone seems to love him down there.
Yeah, of course. So that's going to wrap up this conversation. Overall, Mike, what were your big picture takeaway from going back and watching this one all over again?
This game was like a lot of these games we do. It did not disappoint. It was actually better rewatching it. I picked up on some things that I haven't given a second thought to for the last 15, 16 years. So it was nice to go back and watch. Great game. To
me, it's very much the same, but just being able to watch how close the Cubs were, and honestly, we lived it, we experienced it. We kind of knew in the moment what it was like, but to see how close they were and then how much that city believed and how thirsty that those fans were for a World Series appearance, and then to know what was going to happen and to watch that 7th inning into the 8th is some of the best baseball TV you're going to watch ever. I mean, that 30 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever it was well worth sitting down and watching that entire game. And if you haven't, even if you have, go back and watch it again. We'll put the link up. Again, I'll put the link of the local Fox affiliate feed that we watched so you can see commercials, the painter's pants jeans that we talked about, George Steinbrenner commercial, all that. Plus, you'll get the Fox local pregame and postgame, a little bit of each, which was outstanding as well and gave you a true sense of what was happening in that city at the moment. So on that note, we'll wrap it up. Remember, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Please do that. Leave us a rating if you would. Thanks to those that already have dropped us some ratings. Mike, what, 13? 5-star ratings already? I'll take it.
13, and can't thank everyone enough who's reached out to us. It's nice to know that when we're putting these out, people are listening to them. So that's awesome. And keep them coming, and we'll keep on putting shows up.
Yeah, and make sure you follow us on Twitter, too, at Distant Podcast. We're going to have, nuggets from these games that we do. We'll share all the links to them there as well, but also some kind of history, some sports history nuggets we'll talk about on our Twitter account as well. But also send us games that you think we should talk about. We know about the big ones, but when you're a fan, there's so many games that you care about and are passionate about that were such a big deal, even if they didn't have a huge impact on the national scale. Send them to us. We want to go back and watch those as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on those, plus this game as well, on Bartman, on the Cubs, on 2003. Email us as well if you want to do that, distantpodcast@gmail.com, and check out the website, distantreplaypodcast.com. We'll have show notes for all of our episodes, plus links to go back and watch the game that we talked about. It's all right there on the website. So thanks for joining us again tonight. Another episode coming out every Tuesday. We drop a new episode at noon, so subscribe and you'll have it delivered right to you. I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. Just a little teaser, we're moving back to college football. That'll do it for us on Distant Replay Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.